The sun hadn't even cleared the horizon yet, and the soldiers were grabbing their gear, waiting for orders. Everyone knew there would be a battle that day, and the Spanish would likely strike at dawn. The English soldiers had just come over the channel to help, new recruits you might say, to the ongoing struggle of the 30 Years' War. The Dutch soldiers, on the other hand, knew this war all too well. They were the old hands, and they had been fighting it for years, wondering if it would ever end. The Englishmen on the fortress wall that day were amused to see their Dutch colleagues each put a small glass out of their belt and take a snip. The Englishmen on the fortress wall that day were amused to see their Dutch colleagues each pull a small glass bottle out of their belt and take a sip before settling themselves for battle. The stories passed down through the grapevine say that that is where we get the phrase Dutch courage. But what were those soldiers drinking? It was a liquor called genever, made from the juniper tree. Now, is that really how we got the phrase Dutch courage? I don't know. I couldn't find any solid leads on a primary source that could say, yes, this happened, and here's who saw it and when. But if it is true, what would Dutch courage actually be? Genever was considered a medicine by many, and it was believed to help keep men calm, an advantage in battle. Genever was considered a medicine by many, and it was believed to keep men calm, an advantage in battle, and warm, an advantage in cold weather. So far from the image that I have of Dutch courage being someone, downing shots before doing something dangerous, it would have been people taking a medicinal swig of something that was going to help them get through a tough time. Now, maybe I should acknowledge that I'm pretty sure I learned that phrase from old Western movies, the kind where John Wayne or Jimmy Stewart are saving the town from bad guys, and Dutch courage meant a little or a lot of whiskey. So instead of the corn liquor so popular in my neck of the woods for centuries, we're talking about juniper liquor. Genever is a malted liqueur and actually became the forerunner of gin when those English folks went back to England and figured out how to make their own version. And as important as gin and all of its relatives have been in history, they are a drop in the bucket compared to juniper's wider influence. In fact, as far back as ancient Egypt, the mummification process included juniper oil or tar among the ingredients used. Especially interesting when you consider that juniper doesn't live in Egypt and must have been brought through trade routes from the eastern Mediterranean. Even better, juniper wasn't added just because it smelled nice. Even better, juniper wasn't added just because it smelled nice. Its antifungal and antibacterial properties would have actually helped slow the decomposition process. In more recent times, juniper contributed to culture in ways we can all relate to. Well, maybe not the youngins as much if they always use plastic pencils, but if you use wooden pencils, there's a good chance you've held a piece of juniper in your hands while sketching or jotting down ideas or filling in those silly ovals on standardized tests. When it comes to pencils, you may well have been holding Juniperus virginiana, commonly called eastern red cedar here in the States, though it's not actually a member of the cedar genus. It shares a lot of those characteristics that people love about cedar, though. The wood resists splintering as well as resisting rot, which was what makes it great for things like pencils and fence posts. Those benefits and many others were not lost on the Native Americans who lived with our native junipers for millennia. Medicinally, it was used to treat colds, asthma, rheumatism, back pain, and to control bleeding. It was also used to make cordage and, keep this in mind, spiritual cleansing. I'll come back to that in a minute, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention that Juniperus virginiana is actually having a population boom in a not so beneficial way. It was so over-harvested back in the 19th and early 20th century for the pencil industry that it became difficult to find in enough volume to feed that industry's needs. Fast forward to today, and the species is actually having a population boom in the Great Plains states, where natural fires used to keep the population suppressed. Since those natural fires are no longer allowed to burn, the Juniperus virginiana is spreading like crazy. Now that might sound like a good thing until you realize that as it takes over, it outcompetes a lot of the native grassland species and alters the makeup of the natural community. In better news, the population has also rebounded and is In better news, the population has also rebounded and is growing in the parts of the country where its presence doesn't cause problems, like where I live. I know I consider that a positive because I happen to have a personal love for junipers in general, and if you'll indulge me, I'd like to do something a little different. I struggled with this episode because, as interesting as alcohol or mummies or pencils are, none of those are what really speak to me about juniper. I decided to keep the structure the same for this episode because that's what people have come to expect. But to give you an idea of why juniper seems so important to me, I'd like to share a little bit of a more personal story. Have you ever been out for a walk somewhere and come across a magical little place that feels completely different from everything around it? Almost as if it's its own little world tucked inside the normal one? I love those encounters, and one that always speaks to me is a juniper tree with a carpet of needles and berries beneath it. The first time a little space like that struck me, I was walking through an old historic cemetery, which was already lovely and peaceful, and coming upon that little world of its own felt like I had found a spiritual oasis. Imagine for a moment that you're walking with me through that historic cemetery. We go through the wrought iron gate, and beneath the soaring linden trees we step onto a brick-paved pathway. And beneath the soaring linden trees, we step onto a brick-paved And beneath the soaring linden trees, we step onto a brick-paved pathway. We wander up a slight rise, with my dog running ahead of us, gleefully having fun, running through the tall grass. We pass by row upon row of time-worn headstones with small trees and shrubs interspersed between, probably where a family member has planted them as a tribute. And before long, the brick paving ends, and the path becomes well-packed earth, where generations of people before us have continued to walk long after the paved path ended. Toward the top of that small slope, we approach a cluster of trees, including a few junipers about 8 to 10 feet tall. They aren't enormous, but their impact on that particular spot of ground is. The junipers themselves are a medium green, made more vibrant against the surrounding grass browning in the heat. And under the junipers is the most magical part of all. A bed of dried needles cradles a swath of silvery blue berries. It just may be that carpet of berries that makes the place so magical for me. They're almost luminous in the shade of the trees. It's a reminder that we don't need to go to a mountaintop to find a place of wonder and magic, a place to feel connected, transcendent, like some new level of clarity is at our fingertips if we choose to reach out, like it creates its own thin place wherever it grows. Is it any wonder that a tree that creates such a microcosm beneath its branches has traditionally been planted in cemeteries? It has symbolized crossing over to the other world, rebirth, and protection. In fact, across Europe, people would burn juniper branches in their homes to drive away bad luck or evil spirits. It was thought that juniper could protect you from whatever you needed protecting from, witches, thieves, someone who wanted to hurt you, you name it. Though I've always wondered, if you're using something to protect you from witches, aren't you also doing witchcraft? That's an aside, I know, it's just something I've always thought seemed funny. So what is a thin place? If you haven't heard that term before, it comes from the Celtic tradition, and it's a place where the boundary If you haven't heard that term before, it comes from the Celtic tradition, and it's a place where the boundary between the physical and spiritual softens. The veil is thin, you might say. You might also call it a liminal space if that term's more your speed. If you're looking for a place to spend some time in nature getting to know a tree, why not choose one who is known for protection and can create a welcoming little nook where you can meditate in peace and see if the tree wants to share a little wisdom with you? If you want to create such a space in your own yard, there are a zillion types of juniper available from nurseries. Now, to get the effect I've been talking about, you'd want an upright tree, something like Juniperus virginiana or a Juniperus communis variety like Compressa or Hibernica, something that keeps its tree form. Many of the junipers that are most commonly used in gardens are prostrate varieties, used as ground covers or relatively low-growing shrubs. They have been used so much at commercial developments that many landscape designers refuse to use them anymore, which is a real shame in my opinion. It's a beautiful plant. And while I don't necessarily want to see another shopping center carpeted in creeping juniper, they were used that way because they can survive the harsh conditions that parking lots create. But rather than covering an entire hillside in a massive blue rug juniper, maybe just mix a few of the smaller varieties into your ornamental beds. They can be a nice foil to large-leafed plants or those with a contrasting foliage or flower color. And if you're out and about, keep your eyes peeled for a magical little spot under a protective juniper. You won't regret it.